Over the years, the Valdai Club has become a reputed international forum that unites professionals who are interested in international politics, culture, media, with an angle toward Russia. And as a rule, it's mainly experts on Russia. And we would like people who are professionally involved in observing Russia should have such a forum, such a platform for meeting each other regularly, so that you would get information about us firsthand, not narrated by someone else, from myself personally and from my colleagues, so that you would find out about our stance on all kinds of issues that are of interest for you and your countries and for Russia. These discussions at this forum have always been characteristic by various opinions being represented, often conflicting opinions even, but that's one of the advantages of this discussion club or debate club, how we call it, because where you have only one opinion that is considered to be right, there is no room for discussion. And a discussion is only possible when you compare and juxtapose various approaches, various assessments and opinions. And thanks to your participation, we are able to do that here. I see a lot of internationally renowned politicians in the audience today. I would like to greet all of them, including former presidents such as the President of Afghanistan and our colleagues from the Eurasian Economic Cooperation Organization. I see people from mass media, people of art, and others here in the audience. I hope that today's meeting will be interesting and also helpful. Thank you. I am, however, a little bit confused by the format today, because usually we have several people sitting on stage, and the discussion usually takes a long time. I am, of course, prepared to go solo, as the organizers have suggested, but I hope that this meeting, this talk won't have to go 4 or 5 times longer than usual. And now, without much ado, let's get down to our deliberations.
Okay, it will not be 5 or 6 times as much as usually, but maybe twice as much.
I can manage that.
Mr. President, said it correctly that we need a diversity of views, and we have it here at our valdai discussion meetings. And it's quite a representative audience, you see, and it's expanding. And I mean not only the quantity, but also the new countries which are joining our discussions. That's make situation different. This year, we've had a very informative agenda. And there was one subject, one topic which we usually do not discuss that much, Russia. Before that, we talked about Russia that much during the 10th meeting. That was a huge discussion club gathering. You were there, as usual. And we've decided to come back to the title, not because many were asking to discuss this, not only because of that, but also because we think that we are ready to discuss it. We've prepared a report on this, and we believe that some major shifts are happening in the world. Not only some transformation, but still we are seeing that many lose understanding of what are the pillars of our world. We almost gave up. We can say for sure that we have gone past the point when we could manage the world, control the world. And today, small countries, big countries have to rely on themselves only. We have to ensure their stability, their own growth. And this is why we should really look into whether we are ready to be that way independent and self-sustainable or not. And that is why it will be nice to talk to you about this. Unfortunately, the work we been doing was marked by a very tragic event. Yesterday, we all heard about the tragedy which happened in Kerch. Yesterday, you said it all, you expressed your condolences, and we also expressed our condolences during our session yesterday. One thing which came to everyone's mind was, here we have another terrorist act. Unfortunately, we've grown accustomed to it. It turned out the situation was different, but still. Why am I recalling these things? Because that takes us back to the very first valdai meeting. You mentioned it yourself. It took place amid a very tragic background of the terrorist act in Beslan. I've been there. I was there back then, and the discussion club meeting was not very consistent because people were leaving the audience to take a look at what was happening. And back then, you met with the participants of the club, but during the sessions itself, you had a televised address, which was very, very harsh in terms of words you said. And that's a quote which I remember well, many remember well. One want to get a piece of our country. Others help those who get something from our country. They think that Russia, as one of the biggest nuclear powers, is still a threat. That is why that threat should be neutralized, they believe. Terrorism is an instrument which helps them achieve their goals. Later on, meeting with the members of the Valdai Club, you said that this was a challenge and you're going to stand up to this challenge. Have we responded to that challenge? What do you think?
That is a rather lengthy forward. Last year we had our 14th Valdai Forum. And I think I can hear better this year. I would like to start from what you started from, yesterday's tragedy. This is most likely a result of globalization, strange as that may sound. On social media, on the internet, we see entire communities created. It all started with the well-known tragic shootings in US high schools, where young people who are mentally unstable create false idols, false heroes for themselves. And that means that all of us, not only in Russia but globally, we don't react promptly to the changing realities around the globe. We don't create content that would be helpful and interesting for young people. And so they have to grab this surrogate of heroic images, and that leads to tragedies like this one. And there is real heroism in our everyday life. And one of the areas for showing such heroism is protecting the civilization from the vices of today, one of which, of course, is terrorism. In order to efficiently combat terrorism, and I've said this on many occasions, including the UN General Assembly in New York, the only way to efficiently combat terrorism is together, through unity. And so far, we've been unable to do that to its full extent. There have been efforts, but so far they have not been enough. They've not been sufficient. We have not really joined our forces and our efforts the way we should have. And that's possible based on international law and the necessary resolutions of the United Nations. So answering your question, we have achieved the results we had wanted to achieve, starting from the tragic events that we witnessed in the mid-90s, in the early 2000s. we have mainly achieved our objectives. Let's think back to it. We tend to forget bad things rather quickly. Of course, everybody likes to think of good things. But back then, there was essentially a civil war raging in Russia. It wasn't nationwide, it wasn't going on nationwide, but there were engagements. It was a direct warfare using air forces, artillery. There were a lot of armed groups in Russia, largely manned with people from foreign terrorist organizations, such as people from Al-Qaeda, who were rather active in Russia. Thankfully, we have eradicated that, but we have not gotten rid of terrorism as such. It is still a significant threat in Russia, and that is why we have started active operations in Syria. Because terrorism is an important threat to our neighbors, such as Afghanistan, whose president, Mr. Karzai, I see in this audience. And if we give him the floor, he will probably tell us about the developments in his country today, where terrorism is a significant threat. So globally, we have not defeated terrorism so far, but we have delivered heavy blows to it. And we have taken heavy punishment. We have brought heavy punishment on it and changed its positions and standing here in the Russian Federation.
Well, naturally, it will be appropriate now to talk about the Valdai meeting, which took place in 2015, and it took place 2 weeks after the military operation in Syria started. One of the colleagues asked you a question. I remember it. And the question was, should we really carry out that operation, all the losses, loss of life and expenditure? And you said something which became very, very famous then. When I was growing on the streets of Leningrad, if you cannot avoid a fight, you should strike first. We did this. 3 years have passed. The situation has changed fundamentally, but still the situation is quite dramatic. We've seen some positive trends, we've seen some negative trends. And I'd like to probably repeat that question. Maybe we should have gone there. We've seen people die there. We all remember it.
I do remember that query. And it actually, the question was, are casualties possible? And I said they are possible, but we must prevent the worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario would have been total isolation of terrorist-held territories in Syria and total degradation of statehood there, and infiltration of large numbers of militants from those territories into Russia and neighboring countries, with which we don't essentially have borders, with which we have a visa-free regime and effectively no customs authorities in place. That was a real danger, and through our action, we have largely prevented it from becoming reality, because we have delivered a heavy blow on terrorists in Syria. We have eliminated many of them. A lot of them have given up on further fighting. They've laid down their arms. They have lost faith in their earlier held beliefs and convictions. So I would call this number one. But what's equally important is we have helped Syria preserve its statehood, and thereby we have preserved stability in the entire region. Just yesterday I spoke to the President of Egypt, and he shares this outlook, and many countries and heads of state share this outlook as well. So I believe that we have achieved our objectives largely, that the objectives that we had when we started the military operation in Syria. But look at the overall situation. Countries that earlier undertook to participate in those counterterrorism operations, maybe with self-interest. What has been their result? What achievements have they had in over 2 decades? Almost nothing. We have liberated about 95% of Syrian territory from terrorists. We have re-enhanced statehood in Syria. We have prevented it from crumbling. Of course, there are still problems. What's going on the left bank of the Euphrates River? You probably know that that territory is really controlled by, under the patronage of our American partners who put a stake on Kurdish armed groups, but still ISIS militants have a foothold and they've started to enlarge it. They've captured about 130 families, which is about 700 people, and they're holding them hostage. They've presented an ultimatum and said that they will be executing 10 people a day if their demands are not met. And the other day, they actually did execute 10 people through a firing squad. That is a disaster, and something needs to be done. But our Western partners are keeping quiet about it. And as far as we know, the terrorists have captured several European and US nationals, but so far everybody's keeping mum about that. So indeed, there's a lot still to be done in Syria, but I believe that we have largely achieved our objectives. The next stage for Syria, of course, should be a political settlement under the auspices of the United Nations in Geneva. Right now, what we need to do, what Syria needs to do, is form a constitutional committee, and there is progress, even though it's not as fast as we'd like it to be, but we'll keep moving on.
You said that part of the militants lost faith. They realized they are wrong, they were wrong. Are you sure that they lost faith? Maybe they just realized that they are outnumbered, they cannot win, there is no way they can win, and maybe if situation changes, they come back.
That is possible. You might be partly right. Some of the militants indeed laid down their weapons, and some probably sincerely concluded that their previous goals, their previous convictions were false. And some of them probably have decided to lay low for now, to abuse the humanitarian initiatives just in order to be able to take up arms at a later time. This only means that we should not underestimate terrorism, and we should ramp up our joint efforts to combat terrorism and financing terrorism.
If I may, on the 15th of October, there was the deadline set forward by Turkey in terms of, well, completing the activities in Idlib. Have they completed everything, complied with their obligations?
No, so far they haven't, but they're working on it. And we can see that they're working on it. And in this regard, I would like to thank our Turkish partners. We are seeing that they are actually working on it. It's not all that simple. Quite the contrary. It's all complicated. But they are working on their commitments, and the DMZ, which we agreed upon in the Idlib de-escalation area, 15 kilometers deep, it is being established. Not all heavy weapons have been withdrawn from it. Not all militants and members of terrorist groups such as ISIS or Jabhat al-Nusra have left that area. But our Turkish partners are doing everything they can to meet their commitments. It's not all that simple. And we see that they've even deployed a military hospital to that area because they are having casualties. But they are acting in a tough way and rather efficiently in fighting those terrorist groups.
Thank you. Well, let's over to our favorite topic. It permeates every meeting. We have a lot of colleagues from the US, and the topic of the US, well, we cannot but speak about these issues. In 2016, you said one very interesting phrase. It was just right after the crisis in Ukraine and after the crisis in Syria. Someone asked you from the audience, maybe it is the time to lower the tensions. And you said, we all seek alleviating the tensions. But that is not going to happen through our funerals. If you want to pay for alleviating the tensions with the currency of our funerals, that's not going to happen. No funerals just yet, but I think some still would like to see that happen. Lately, you've had a lot of experience communicating with the US president, and really a lot of things are happening, but all those things are negative, not positive at all. Maybe I'm wrong, but your meeting with Donald Trump, they lead to, well, opposite results, opposite to those which are expected. Maybe we should give up trying, we should take a pause, so let them sort out their own mess inside the country.
You know, there is this really old joke. Maybe some of you still don't know it. Question, how do you relax? Answer, I'm not genuinely strained, I'm not tense. And that goes for tension as far as international relations are concerned. We don't put anyone under stress. We don't create problems for anyone. It is us who get accused by others, saying that it's highly likely, as they like to say, that we have meddled somewhere or did something else. But at the same time, no one bothers to present any evidence. For me, it is clear, and I've said that before, that this is a result of political struggles, of domestic politics in the West, and also of various domestic disputes, of political strife among Republicans or in Britain as regards Brexit. And playing this Russia card is a very popular tool, but it's damaging for everyone. I hope it'll pass at some point, but it seems that we need to wait until those domestic political crises are settled in those countries. Whether that will happen in the US after the midterm election, maybe, or maybe that'll happen in 2020 after the next presidential election in the United States, and then the president won't have to keep looking to those people who speculate using anti-Russian rhetoric. Whether our meetings with President Trump were helpful, I believe that despite all the efforts to discredit those meetings, they were rather positive rather than negative. Because we see what's going on. You know, we can read, and we read media sources, and we are watching what's going on domestically in the United States as far as politics go. But of course, it is better to be in contact with each other and to communicate rather than fight each other and have constant rows. But I believe that as far as domestic politics in the US goes, of course, it hasn't gotten any better after our meetings with President Trump. Someone keeps trying to use those to their ends, but President Trump is still insisting on stabilizing the US-Russia relations, and we'll see where it will head in the future, but we are prepared for improving those relations anytime. Can you hear me better now?
A lot of books have been published about Donald Trump.
It's interesting to read.
And the image which is being created, well, he's a man which listens only to himself. Does he listen to you?
That is not true about him. Maybe he is like that with someone else, but then it's their own fault. As for our communication with President Trump, we have a professional dialogue. And of course, he does hear you. I can see that. He doesn't only hear you, he reacts to what you say. He can agree with you or disagree with you on something, the same as I can disagree with him on certain issues. We have different approaches, we have different opinions, but that's normal. That is a discussion between two partners. And I don't subscribe to this view that Trump doesn't hear people talking to him.
You know, among the experts, political scientists, usual topic is when there is a deadlock in relations, and it looks like we are facing that deadlock. It is useful to have a sobering crisis in relation, when both sides come to understand that the threat is real, and every should take a step back from that brink, like the Caribbean missile crisis. And some say maybe we need that kind of crisis now so that the US would, well, divert from the inner problems and would come to realize that the stakes are very high and it's time to do something positive.
It's a bad idea. Increasing and aggravating tension and ramping up hysteria, that's not our method, as they say. And you know, bringing the entire world to a brink of a global crisis with results that are impossible to forecast, that is not our way, and we'll never use that kind of politics.
Well, a very exhaustive response. I'd like to give one more your quote. We were talking about the air defense system. You said Russia is not afraid of conflicts. Well, the situation has changed. What are the conflicts we are not afraid of today?
None. We're not afraid of anything. A country with such a large territory, with such a defense system, with people like that who are preparing to stand up for their sovereignty and independence. Not every country has this proclivity of its people to sacrifice themselves, such preparedness or readiness to sacrifice themselves for their motherland. Not every country has that, but we do, and that gives us confidence.
All right, you said we're not stirring any trouble for anyone. Some people in the hall can probably argue, because the opinion is that Russia causes a lot of trouble.
When is later? How long is it going to take? Let's start now. Otherwise, how long will we have to spend here?
All right, I get it. Well, if we are not stirring any troubles, but certainly there are parties which cause trouble to us.
Of course they do. They try their best to.
And one more famous quote of yours, Russia is a bear. That's the metaphor everyone knows. And bear is not asking for permissions. Bear is the master of taiga. He's not going to migrate to other climate zones. But he's never going to give up on his taiga. That should be clear for everyone. Point blank. So what about our taiga? Does everyone understand that this is it? It's our taiga?
It's always been like that. You know, this is it. And we're having that now as well. But we're living in a world whose global security relies on nuclear potential. And Russia is one of the world's largest nuclear powers. And I said that publicly, that in response to the creation of the US global missile defense system, we decided to improve our own systems. And some of them have been completed, some of them will be deployed in the nearest months. And I mean the avant-garde system. It is a fact of life, recognized by experts. We have surpassed all of our partners and competitors in this area. as regards high-precision, hypersound weapons. No one has that. Some countries are only planning to test those a year or two from now, and we already have it in our arsenal. It's already it's already at our disposal, and therefore we feel much more confident. Therefore, of course, there are many other risks and challenges, such as climate change, proliferation, nuclear proliferation, global terrorism. Those are all challenges, and proliferation of nuclear arms. If we don't check it, it's also if nuclear weapons end up in the wrong hands, such as terrorist hands, it will lead to a disaster. But of course, Russia has a large territory. We're not afraid of anyone. We don't want anything from anyone, but we value our sovereignty and independence. It's always been like that in our history. It is in the DNA of our people, and therefore we feel confident.
Well, speaking about the fact that we don't need anyone from anyone, some would argue.
Of course
Crimea,
they would. Right? Crimea is something of ours, something that's ours. It's not ours because we came and grabbed it. And those who would like to dispute this, those who would like to argue with me on this, such a debate would be dead-ended right away. We're all Democrats here. What is democracy? It's power of the people. How do you see the will of the people? Through elections, through referenda. The people of Crimea came to a referendum and they voted in favor of A, being independent from Kiev, and B, becoming part of the Russian Federation. I'd like to remind you that there was no referendum in Kosovo. It was only the Kosovo parliament that voted for splitting off from Serbia. And everybody who wanted to support that said, oh, we agree, we accept those results. But they don't accept the results of the Crimean referendum. Oh, let's look at the UN Charter, let's look at UN documents. Yes, you can look at the UN Charter where the right to self-determination of nations is attested. We can debate for a long time, but it is about the will of the people living in that territory, and they've manifested it clearly.
Speaking about the people, I just recall that back in 2010, during that very session, it was the 10th meeting, it was the year 2013, you quoted Solzhenitsyn, and one of his biggest ideas was that saving people is way more important than anything else. The world of today sees very high competition for people, for souls and minds of people, for human capital. It's more important than any territories or anything. And Ms. Solzhenitsyn took part in one of the sessions. In your opinion, we're talking about conflicts, some classical conflicts, but if we talk about competition, rivalry, in terms of the minds and souls of people, are we ready for that competition? Will we win it?
I believe we are. We largely are. You see in the front rows of the audience the head of the broadcasting network, Russia Today. What's going on in some of the countries where they broadcast? Their offices are being shut down. What does it mean? That means that those people are afraid of the competition. We're not shutting anyone down here in Russia, but in those countries, they prevent this network from performing their functions as a media outlet. They create obstacles to them, and that means we are winning over. We only have one radio station. We only have one network. Where we don't have a monopoly in as far as global media goes. We don't have networks such as CNN, Fox News, or the BBC. We only have one media outlet with rather modest capabilities. But even if it draws such fear and enmity through its influence on people. That means we are achieving our objectives. I know that in France they don't like you very much. If I get to Paris, if you invite me, I will visit RT offices in Paris, and I'll be glad to see how you guys work there.
That would be good, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Well, let's continue. I think this is a very important subject to discuss. In your historical speech, well, it has become historical and dated 2014. It's called the Crimea speech by some. Well, because Crimea back then became once again part of Russia. So you were appealing to the notion of the Russian world and compatriots, nation divided. That was very impressive. I was touched. But you touched upon some very, very complicated things. You stirred up very special feelings, feelings of national identity, attitude towards ourselves, our country, our territories. That can be a good instrument or a bad weapon. It depends. And we've seen a lot of things happening in the Russian world too, and we see these negative things continuing, like take the church in Ukraine, and there'll be some other bad things will be happening. So let me be bold. Don't you agree that you decided to make that move? Don't you regret the results we have?
Honestly, I can't really understand your question. I think it's natural. We should always raise this question. We shouldn't lose track of it. Our national identity is what makes us who we are. It's about our culture and our history. And this preservation of the people, which you spoke about, taking a quote from Solzhenitsyn, it's also about culture and preserving our identity. If we lose it, we will cease to exist. You can find a lot of examples in history. We don't even remember the names of the tribes and nations that existed back in the day and that have become obsolete. Why should we go this way? We would like to be Russians or Tatars or Mordva or all those other ethnic groups. We have over 100 of them living in the territory of the Russian Federation, and we need to reinforce our identity.
And you said many times, including during our meetings here at this club, that any kind of chauvinism deals a huge blow to the very nation, the very people which is being cared for. And back in 2014 you said that the biggest nationalist in Russia is you, yourself. Are you still a nationalist yourself?
I see you have taken your time preparing for this, and you're doing your best trying to catch me on something. There is no contradiction here. I will tell you what I meant. Nationalists, what they keep emphasizing is that they are the best protectors of the interests of a specific ethnic group or nation, whereas the Russian Federation, Russia, ever since its early days, came to be as a multi-ethnic country, as a multi-ethnic state. We have with us today a lot of people who are professionally involved in studying those issues. I see here the director of the Hermitage Museum, even though he is an expert on the Middle East, but he also knows very well how the Russian nation came to be. It didn't exist forever, you know. It was formed by various Slavic tribes. You know, there were no Russians up to a certain point, and then they suddenly, and then they, at some point, they emerged based on a common market under the rule of a certain earl or prince based on common religion, such as Orthodox Christianity. And then when statehood began to form, in the at the early stages of Russian statehood, there were a lot of Finnish and Ugric tribes that also became part of it. And we're now finding a lot of historic evidence that Finno-Ugric tribes lived not only in the northwest of what's today Russia, but also in central Russia, in Central European Russia. So Russia originally appeared as a multi-ethnic, multi-denomination, multi-religious country. And it became this way initially. It managed to develop this way because there was tolerance towards the representatives of various ethnic groups or religious groups. That was the basic of contemporary Russia. And if we want this basis to be preserved and to be developed, and if the Russians are the state-forming ethnic group in Russia, we must abstain from assaulting and baiting other ethnic groups, because the Russian people should be interested in preserving Russia as a unified state. And if we start baiting other ethnic groups, we will lose that. And I would like Russia to be preserved as a unified state. Because I am for Russian interests. That is the kind of nationalism I meant, not the wild, uncivilized nationalism that will lead to a disintegration of Russia.
Are you alone? Do you have any, alike thinkers?
I have like-minded people, almost 164 million, and 46 million.
All right, Mr. Putin, we agreed that we should preserve Russia. But you said something very harsh.
You keep grabbing onto what I've ever said.
That's my job.
Will we continue to have our discussion one-on-one, or because we have other people here in this audience?
There's time for everything. So can you please explain? You said it. Why do we need a world without Russia? Many have their own views. It's like après nous le déluge. After us, anything can happen. Maybe you had something different in mind.
Well, no. First of all, Louis XIV, when he said, after us is the flood, he was actually responding to accusations that he was spending too much money, money from the budget on building palaces and holding balls. But actually, he wasn't that much of a big spender, because after him, many palaces were left to the successors as heritage. And also, he was an estatist. He was the creator of Europe's first regular army, by the way. So he wasn't all as bad. What he said doesn't mean that he actually acted in this manner. That was just polemics, him debating other people. As for what I said, we were discussing with you some topic which I don't quite remember right now. You shouldn't take things out of context. To remind you, we were speaking of whether we are prepared, whether I'm prepared to use our weapons, including weapons of mass destruction, for the protection of Russia and its interests. And I was responding to that. And I'd like to remind you what I actually said. I said, in our concept of using nuclear weapons, there is no such notion as a preventive strike. And I would like to request all those present here and all those who will be reporting on what I'm saying and analyzing every word I say, or using what I say for their own narratives. Please take note of this fact that Russia does not have the concept of a preventive strike in its doctrine for using nuclear arms. We only consider using it in response. That means that we are prepared to use nuclear weapons only when we have hard facts that a potential aggressor is striking on Russia, on Russian territory, with nuclear weapons. Now, this is no secret. We have prepared an early warning system. We have created it and we keep improving it. This system analyzes globally, worldwide, where launches are being made, including oceanic surface. They identify where missiles are being launched from, secondly, their trajectory, and the point of impact. All this is being identified and analyzed within seconds. And so only if we identify through that system that missiles are being launched at us, only that will we deliver a retaliatory strike, a strike in response. Only when there are missiles airborne being launched at Russia. Of course, that would lead to a global disaster, to a nuclear catastrophe. But Russia cannot become its instigator or initiator, because we don't have a preventive strike in our as part of our military doctrine. Of course, once someone has launched nuclear missiles at us, it would be maybe too late to stop them, but a potential aggressor should know that there will be retaliation, and we will get to heaven as martyrs, and our enemies will simply die as dogs, because they won't even have time to redeem themselves.
Then I would like to address Metropolitan Tikhon, but maybe a bit later I'll do that. Well, maybe you grew tired of me. Maybe just one little question, and then we'll have a Q&A session. Just a follow-up to what you said, meaning all that counterattack and where each of us will be going afterwards. Yesterday we had a wonderful session. Mr. Gergiev, he is a wonderful composer, an artist. He's also a very socially active person. He's an activist himself. We talked about many things. He said that his opinion was that 3 countries, 3 leaders bear the responsibility for the world. USA, Russia, China, and that sequence is not clear-cut, it's any way you want. So these countries can either achieve something or maybe, well, do something positive or do the other thing. So there are 3 countries which have the potential, which is bigger than the potential of any other country. Good sense or in bad sense. But being a person with that kind of responsibility, you're one of these 3. Do you ever feel afraid? Are you scared?
What do you mean by terrified?
I mean, terrified, yes, because you bear the responsibility for the whole world.
So what? No, I'm not afraid.
Okay, I have no questions then.
Generally, you know, this is not a simple question, because fear is the reverse side of something that is natural for any living creature. This instinct of self-preservation. Everyone has this instinct of self-preservation, and one of its manifestations is fear. It's a way of reacting to danger, to a possible threat. But, you know, when I just started working in security forces after university, and then working in intelligence, we had this rule or principle. When you start working on something, you have to figure out what it is about, what it's related to. And once you start working on it, you must work without being haphazard or dashing about it. You must be circumspect, but you must not be thinking about your personal, individual self-preservation. You have to be careful, but you should not be thinking of your self-preservation. That is very important. That is essential for people who are responsible for the security of their entire country, of their entire nation. We've already thought back to the tragic events of the late 1990s or the 2000s. I remember flying over the city of Grozny, which was razed to the ground during the fighting. And there were people shooting at us from every rock on the ground. We had to fly real low, to hover real low on our helicopter to avoid being shot down. I had never seen previously helicopters flying so low and so fast. It could be scary at some point, but that was my choice. And today it is also my choice. And I think it is the same for all of our colleagues. Of course, they might have their second thoughts, but if you've made a choice, you must act without looking at the possible negative implications for you personally. You must think about the consequences for those who you are working for.
Well, fear is a double-edged sword. It's something inside you, but it's also a means of manipulating. Do you think that's that kind of instrument?
No. It is a bad incentive. It is a bad way of managing people because it's unreliable. The best tool for governing and counteracting with society is convincing them and positive motivation. It is important that people that you communicate with it must be a joint effort for you and them. It must be joint work. Those who make decisions must not distance themselves from those who are supposed to implement those decisions. All of you have to work on implementing that, and then it will be good results.
Thank you. Okay, let's do something all together now. Please, you have the first question. Vladimir Putin, you said it right that Russia is not stirring any troubles for others. But in China we have a saying that the forest would like to be silent, but the wind never lets us be quiet and tranquil. That's true. Both China and Russia have been labeled. They are saying we are states which are revisionist states. Also, China and Russia, together with Iran and North Korea, have been labeled most dangerous adversaries of the most peaceful country of the world, of all times, of all people. Then, there are sanctions on Russia. There is a trade war against us. The situation is very serious. Again, if we recall what a famous Hong Kong movie featured, one of the words, Uncle. Uncle is very disappointed. Consequences will be terrible for you. Well, then, our future is one for two countries. And I would like to ask you something. How will Russia respond to this? And can you recommend anything to China? And thank you so much.
My dear friend and colleague, I think that China is no less a great nation and a great people than the nation you were referring to. The Chinese civilization is ancient and grandiose. I don't think that China really needs our recommendations, but I can share my point of view with you. You've quoted this Chinese proverb: the forest would like some peace, but the wind won't let it have any. But I can say weather tends to change. The time will come and the wind will die down. I think that you shouldn't react hastily to everything that's going on in a way that might aggravate the situation. But of course, you always need to react to protect your interests. And actually, that's what we do, both China and Russia. And the reason I say that weather tends to change and winds tend to pass, those who create those winds, they also suffer from the consequences. You've mentioned trade wars and sanctions. It seems to me, I probably won't say anything new for some of the people in this audience. Experts will see what I'm talking about. But certain rhetorics in the US, it's really dictated, it's really prompted by their domestic politics. And let's look at their political calendar. They have this midterm election right now, and soon they will be having a presidential election. They need to preserve the current upward trends in their economy. And in the midterm perspective, such rhetoric can such sanctions, such measures can have a positive effect. But in the long term, there will be bad ramifications coming, because everything that is being done now affects the global economy. And it is inevitable that it will affect its regional or national economies. Right now, our trade with our exports to the U.S. is about $500 billion, and if it continues, it will reach 1.5 trillion. It will be one of the reasons for a further downturn in the global economy, and it will affect everyone. So you can instigate winds, but at a certain point it will become damaging even for you. And therefore, I think that the Chinese civilization is ancient, and the Chinese have a lot of patience. And I think that the capabilities of the Chinese economy, they really enable you to withstand all of that. And the Chinese economy is now bigger than the American economy in absolute figures. Per capita, the U.S. economy is still ahead. The U.S. economy is high-tech, and it's very quick about implementing innovative, state-of-the-art solutions. And both Russia and China still have something to work on and still have something to learn from our American partners. But everything changes, and the global economy is changing, and the growth rates of the Chinese economy are very high. They've been somewhat adjusted lately, but they're still high. And at some point, it will lead to a situation where the composition in the global economy will be changing, even though these actions are creating a certain danger for everybody, not just for China.
Since we're talking about the wind, let's talk about the East then. Do you expect any questions? What kind of question do you expect to see?
I have no idea. Are you going to ask me about the islands again? That's not interesting.
Excuse me, I cannot but ask this. 2 years ago, in this very hall, I ask you the following question. What are the chances that there will be an atmosphere which would be allowing Russia to sign a peace treaty? Maybe in the upcoming 2 or 3 or 4 years. Back then,